Good evening, everyone. Today is Wednesday, February 23rd, 2022. This is a special meeting of the Cupertino City Council. Madam City Clerk, would you please conduct the roll call?
Councilmember Moore?
Here.
Councilmember Way?
Here.
Councilmember Willie?
Here.
Vice Mayor Chow?
Here.
Mayor
And
Paul?
I'm here. Thank you, Madam City Clerk. The first item on our agenda on this special meeting is to prepare for an agendized discussion with our legislators. Both of the items on our agenda tonight are under a council workshop, and essentially it's a discussion with the state legislators that represent Cupertino. So that would be Assemblymember Evan Lowe, as well as State Senator David Cortese. And so for each of these, I'll go ahead and open it up to the public for discussion, although I do note that there seemed to be, in one of the presentations at least, an opening for public comment near the end. So let me check in with staff to see what's contemplated here. Katie, I think you're probably staffing this. And so did we have in mind taking public comment on these items at a particular time at the end of our discussion, or were we wanting to have it in the normal spot?
So for the preparation, item number 1, you can have public comment the normal way you do it for the item, as long as we conclude by 6:30, so that we could start promptly with our legislators. For the second item, the discussion with legislators, we hope to have the full discussion with the legislators, and then we'll take public comment at the end.
Okay, good.
This is in hopes to have make the most of the time. We have an hour and a half with our legislators, so we're just hoping to make the most of that time with them.
Absolutely understood. Okay, so, and Katie, about how long do you expect for the staff presentation for item number 1?
7 minutes. I can run through it very quickly.
Okay, sounds good. Well, let me just before you do that, I'll let everyone know we'll take a hard stop at 6:25 to basically have a break between this item number 1 and item number 2, so that we have a clear delineation as to when item number 2 is starting, and to in consideration for our public state representatives joining us at 6:30. So Katie, take it away. We will take public comment after the staff presentation before we bring it back to council. Thanks, Katie.
Great. Katie Nomura, Deputy City Manager. Thank you, Honorable Mayor and council members, for hearing my presentation this evening. So as the mayor described, we will be having a discussion with our legislators, our state legislators. This is in an effort, this idea came from the LRC, the Legislative Review Committee, in hopes to kind of build relationships with our legislators and figure out how we can best work together. So that's the impetus behind this, the heart behind this. And here's a tentative schedule of what we've drafted. Of course, per council direction, that's what this hour is for, or this 15 minutes is for, is to determine, would you like to change the setup? But this is how we're proposing the discussion can flow. We would start with an introduction from the mayor and vice mayor. Then the legislators can discuss highlights from the last session for 30 minutes. Council would then discuss their priorities, in which we could have the presentation I'm about to show you in a couple of moments, or you can choose to divvy that up amongst council members. And then we also have legislators discussing their priorities and areas of interest, and hopefully we can find areas where we overlap, and then we'll end with public comment. And so in terms of the legislative priorities presentation, the LRC asked me to put together a presentation to try and briefly go over our extensive legislative platform. And so we have these guiding principles in our legislative platform: fiscal responsibility, local control, sustainability, education, infrastructure and mobility, that's transportation, healthy, safe, and resilient community. And so it's important to the city to be fiscally responsible and ensure that our resources and assets are properly safeguarded. We also want to protect any funding sources that are due to the city and that provide revenues for the city operations and provide services to our community. And the city would oppose unfunded mandates. For local control, the city continues to support local control and is increasingly concerned about the number of legislative proposals seeking to circumvent or preempt the city's appropriate local authority. Housing, and this includes housing and land use in particular, have been areas of interest. And so you can see that the city supports legislation that positively addresses housing shortages in communities. We are just concerned about the ones that have unintended consequences and are one-size-fits-all solutions. We feel that locally we can make the best decisions for our communities. We oppose efforts to erode local decision-making and also are in support of legislation that provides state funding for affordable housing. Cupertino continues to be a sustainability leader, and so we support legislation that also supports sustainability and emphasize sustainable development, improve environmental standards and regulatory processes, and promote sustainable energy policies. We also would support legislation that provides incentives and financial support for preservation of natural resources, organic waste recycling, and landfill diversion. For education, we understand that our education system is very important, especially in Cupertino. We really value our students. We value what resources are available to them. So we support efforts to ensure that California schools have adequate funding so that every child has an opportunity to be successful. Infrastructure and mobility. The city supports legislation that provides funding for transit solutions that increase the speed and frequency of services, also in support of funding opportunities for maintenance and repair of roadways. We also support investments and maintenance and rehabilitation of aging infrastructure to allow system capacity expansion to support the city's smart growth principles. Healthy and safe and resilient communities. So in Cupertino, we support legislation that protects and enhances services to the city's vulnerable populations. So economically disadvantaged, elderly, homeless, and disabled, for example. We also would support assistance for local law enforcement, as well as being able to contribute to local public safety and mental well-being. We also support legislation that strengthens local disaster preparedness and emergency planning and response activities. This is ever more prevalent because of COVID currently. And so this is just a highlight and summary of our legislative platform. If there's any questions, or I can definitely make some edits on the fly if the council wishes to. I'm interested in hearing if the council would like me to give this presentation. If you all would like to present this, that is absolutely encouraged as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Katie. Before we head back to council, let's go ahead and bring it to our members of the public. And I'll remind our members of the public that you'll have 3 minutes each to speak. And by the time that the first member of the public is done speaking, please have your hand raised on Zoom so that you can be called upon for providing public comment here. Our first member of the public with a hand raised is Jenny. And so we'll go ahead and start your timer, Jenny, and welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Darcy. I'm glad you all are having this. Thank you for the staff presentation. Challenges of COVID have affected everyone. We wound up with Zoom, and it will be nice to have discussions with our legislators. I will tell you today, one of my questions will be too about the redistricting and the discussions of, will we have a new Senate district? I think we're supposed to have Mr. Becker. I discovered today that inquiring about my mother's area in the county and the golf course, that she will be getting a new Senate district, complete brand new Senate district in Santa Cruz County. So this is a whole new kettle of fish, never been through this before. So maybe we can have some discussions from the legislators about this. So yes, we have a lot of questions, but when we're looking ahead for 2 to 4 years, having a whole new Senate district is going to be a very, very interesting situation. Thank you so much.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Jennifer. And we don't have any other hands raised from the public. And so I will bring this back to our council for any questions of Katie, or I note that we have Gonzalez and Son here, both Gonzalez's, it seems. And so thank you very much for being here. And we have our city manager as well as Katie, as I mentioned previously. So anyone want to kick us off on this portion of the discussion? From what I recall, we're having this so that we could kind of compare notes prior to our legislators coming on because we didn't want to, have any kind of a serial communication. So this is an opportunity for us to have a discussion. And as Katie noted, if you have any input with regard to who provides the presentation, I think Katie did a very excellent job. It's well encapsulated. But if anyone has, input on that or who wants to say what, I think, for my own part, I think we have really good free form discussions within, kind of the context of, time constraints that are, something that I try to shepherd through in an efficient and fair manner. But any comments at this point as well about our legislative platform or the divvying up of topics? Happy to hear about what my fellow council members' thoughts are there. So, Councilmember Willie, you have a hand raised. Would you like to kick us off on some comments and questions here?
Yeah, so my first comment pertains to what is going to be presented to our legislators. And so I think Katie has done a real good job with that. But, staff versus city council. City council is here to represent the community, and talking to the legislators about what we and the community truly hope for, I think needs to be a discussion between the city council and the legislators. You have a discussion one-on-one, you have a meeting of the minds, and when it's channeled through another leg or branch, it doesn't come, in my view, it doesn't come out as we're talking with you. It's organizations are talking. And so I'd prefer, Mayor, you're so eloquent, for you to present it, I think is great. And then us to add our thoughts is the best approach. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Councilmember Willie. I'm happy either way. I'll go with pleasure of the majority. I mean, if you were talking about my personal preference, I would just as soon Katie have it so that I can kind of, tune into, the thinking on the dynamic. But happy to present it if that's the will of the majority. So any other comments from council at this time or questions with regard to the presentation? I will say I thought that, the exercise in defining legislative priorities, which, I'm just so grateful that, a couple of our council members pioneered here, the last couple of years. I believe that was, Vice Mayor Chow and Councilmember Willie to make sure that we had, those defined. Have just made such a difference in terms of our focal points and, talking about how we proceed with the work of the public. And, when I look at the presentation that Katie provided, I think it's very elegantly, set forth. And these are great priorities, and you can see how much they've distilled into, really a clear set of, sensible missions, I guess, if you will, in these various categories. I think 6 general categories. Vice Mayor Chow, you have your hand raised.
Hi. Yeah, I actually like Katie's presentation. I think she has done a great job. And then I think according to the schedule, there is a time for the mayor to make comment, and also I will make comment as vice mayor and also chair of the legislative committee. I think we and each council member will be able to make comment too. I think we can make comment on top of the Katie's presentation. Katie's presentation is like an overall breadth of the platform. I thought she probably would do a better job than any of us. Yeah, and my plan, in my comment, I hope to take the chance to clarify some misconceptions that legislators might have about Cupertino in terms of our housing element sites, how many are approved, how many units are approved, because I find out a lot of times they really don't know. And they get information from a lot of advocates who get information from media. Most of those are inaccurate. So I would like to take this chance to clarify that. Then in terms of school, I will pitch a little for our school too, that we are the lowest funded in the entire state. I wonder if they know that. If they don't, they should know the status we are in. Yeah, so I will make certain comments from also my point of view. I guess it's not really as chair of the legislative committee. Yeah, so how do I fit those in?
Okay, great. Well, when I look at the breakdown, and Katie, if you want to put up slide number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Maybe it's the other presentation. It looked like there was a timeout. Oh, the slide number 2. When I look at the breakdown of the various times here, basically it's in category 3 where the council has an opportunity to discuss our respective priorities. So, I mean, my plan was basically to divvy this out into essentially tranches of 3.5 minutes because, to allow for some transitions. And so, yeah, each of us would have a few minutes to kind of share what our priorities were. And then, I will say that the document, I printed out 2 to a page, so you can't really see it that well, but this is our legislative platform. It's part of our materials that come with this agenda, as well as, of course, the Legislative Action Committee that's been, Legislative Review Committee, I should say, that's been working so well over the past couple of years in terms of, studying these issues, setting them forward, and making sure that we have community awareness of them. I know that can't all get captured in 3.5 minutes by any far stretch, but at the very least, we have that written feedback on it. In terms of the legislators discussing their priorities and areas of interest, I mean, I'll do my best to guide, feedback and discussion points based upon what we're saying in this item number 3 from our legislators. And, I think that's just a generally good type of back and forth. I mean, we can reserve some time if we want, truly more of a free form discussion. Happy to maybe take 5 minutes off of our priorities and 5 minutes off the legislators' time, and maybe put 10 minutes of a follow-up comment following public comment, for instance. So those are just some ideas, but of course, at the end of this, I mean, we have to respect the very busy schedules of our state legislators, but I think it's a good exercise. 90 minutes is actually, a fair amount of time to, go over, topics. But, even if it does encompass the entirety of legislative perspective of our governing body. But, at the same time, with some good planning, I think we can cover quite a bit. So as a tangible, point of suggestion, I would say just, maybe we take 5 minutes off. Numbers 3 and 4, and after public comment, have some time to follow up. But Vice Mayor, you still have your hand raised. Did you have further comment at this time?
So according to the current outline, there is no place where our legislative platform is presented. So do you plan to present that?
Well, I think that from the perspective of the outline, if you're looking at the entirety of the time, you do have roughly an hour and a half. I mean, it might not be all that optimistic. It might not be overly optimistic to expect public comment to happen in about 10 minutes because, as of right now, we have 4 attendees online. But I mean, in terms of having that initial presentation, my understanding was that Katie was going to re-provide that presentation at the beginning. And so
We're
if you
actually planning to do it as item 3, as part of item 3. But if you want it in the beginning, I can.
I see. So you're going to fold that into there. So we have to account for 7 minutes of that presentation within the discussion of our priority. I see. Okay. Then I think that we're probably talking more along the lines of redistributing to, that only gives us about 2, not even 3 minutes on the council discussion and viewpoints. Yeah, no, I see that that is a bit constrained. I would say maybe up that to 25 minutes, and I'd be happy to, cede my introduction time. I mean, Vice Mayor, if you'd like to,
Yeah,
provide,
I don't think I need 5 minutes, right?
okay.
Three-
I mean, I think just a polite introduction. I mean, I could literally provide it here. We really appreciate Assemblymember Lowe and Senator Cortese, being here tonight. And so, without further ado, I'd like to give them some time to discuss highlights from the last session, something like that, and then we can kind of get into it after we've heard, their updates from Sacramento. Introduction from the mayor and vice mayor. From my perspective, I think we could even nix it and just call it an introduction. And vice mayor, if you want to provide it, I'm more than happy to see that to you. I mean, you've done so much work in the last several years on this, so. I would suggest that we
I'm
just.
imagining introduction is very light. We won't really go into substance of things like the housing element performance that I'm planning to talk about. That probably should come in item 3 when it's more about, I would like to clarify how much Cupertino has done in terms of housing. I don't think that's suitable for introduction, right? So.
Why don't we just make it 3 minutes? You provide a minute, I'll provide a minute, and then,
Yeah.
Because what I said, probably take the bulk of a minute anyway, and then it can kind of get the
That sounds
state
good.
legislators, Okay, so let's make that 3, and then for our discussion of priorities, we can let's just keep it something that, 25 is fine. We don't have to make it 27 or whatever. I mean, it seems a little weird and exact at that point, but so our intro, let's just make that a 3-minute intro, and then we'll just build some, buffer time in between. So, okay. Anything else, Vice Mayor? I mean, otherwise,
No,
I think point well taken for the purpose of this. I would be more than happy to adjourn us until 6:30, or to take a break until 6:30, and at which time we can start with the legislators. Vice Mayor Chow, you have your hand raised.
a little the rationale of putting the public comment at the end is that legislators' time is limited. We don't know how long that would be, so we don't want to go into their time. So if they can stay and listen to public comments, great. If they cannot, they might be able to leave early. So that's the intent. On the public comment is not really a way to provide town hall with the legislators. For that, there might be other venue. So yeah, this meeting is really a conversation between legislators and the council members.
Okay,
Yeah.
Makes sense. All right. Well, thank you, Vice Mayor Chow. We're at 5:53. Jason or Paul Gonzalez and Gonzalez, did you have any comments that you'd like to make at this point with regard to, the legislative perspective on this?
Well, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, I want to first just thank you for the opportunity to participate. We're new to the team, but it's a privilege and an honor to represent your city. I mentioned we do have some history of previously working with your city on the no and low property tax issue. Just very briefly for the legislative discussion, I think that Mayor and Vice Mayor really hit the nail on the head, so to speak, with the term of feedback and discussion points, and to have a discussion, because we oftentimes advise when you have these type of meetings, albeit Zoom is a new world, but if we do all the presentation and all the talking and don't hear the feedback from the legislators, or allow them also to provide feedback on your issue points, I think we miss that opportunity to hear from them. So our firm's approach is a natural deference to the mayor and the council and the legislators. So I don't expect you'll hear much from us. This is your time, and I think it should go well, but it should be that free-flowing conversation would be my advice. And I think you obviously zeroed in on that. So thank you for the time.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Jason. And so, we'll go with the outline that we've arrived at, and we'll see everyone in a little bit more than half an hour. We'll start up again at 6:30 for item number 2. So see you then. Thanks very much. And it is now 6:30, and it is at this time certain that we have agendized our item number 2. And so thank you for rejoining us. We're still in our special meeting, and it's still February 23rd, 2022, and this is a workshop. Essentially, it's an opportunity for the Cupertino City Council and the public of Cupertino to interface with the state legislators that represent us. And so we're very pleased today to have Senator Dave Cortese as well as Assemblymember Evan Lowe committed to speaking with us this evening. And so with regard to the time flow in our next 90 minutes or so, we discussed this in item number 1. And so the first the first couple of minutes really is just going to be a brief introduction by myself and Vice Mayor Chow. And then we're going to open it up to the legislators that we have here today for approximately half an hour to discuss highlights from the prior legislative session. Then we'll be discussing our priorities. Katie Nomura will be providing a slideshow presentation from council with regard to their our legislative review committee agenda work over the course of the last couple of years, but more specifically for the current session. And our council will have a few minutes each to talk about our own perspectives of those priorities. And then finally, for about 20 minutes, the legislators can discuss their priorities vis-a-vis some of the discussion that we've had over the course of the previous hour or so. And then we will open it up to the public for their comments. Our assembly member as well as senator are welcome to stay, of course, after the public comments are done, but in respect of their time, we'll make sure to keep to the committed 90 minutes. And it looks like both representatives are here now. And so let me just give this to Vice Mayor Chow to provide some brief remarks as well from the Vice Mayor.
Hi. Are the legislators here?
I see a couple of windows representing Senator.
I see Tara from Dave Cortese's office, and hi, Evan.
Welcome, Assemblymember Lowe.
Good to see you all. And you got a good dynamic duo here with Paul and Jason as well too. So we're all well represented.
There you go.
Oh, great. So I don't see Senator Cortese yet.
Yeah, he's hopping on very shortly. He just walked into his house.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We are so honored to finally have this conversation with our assembly member and our senator. And so Cupertino, I think I talked to Evan before that, although we disagree with some issues, I think as Cupertino residents, I represent our constituents and you represent your constituents. And we are only a small portion of the area you represent. So I will advocate for my constituents and you will advocate for people who you are accountable for. We may agree, we may disagree, but then we will both advocate for things that people care about. And so I think we can always have a conversation and then we can always be friends, whether we agree on something or not. So I hope that this is a start of a collaboration on the different issues in the future. Yeah. Hi, Senator.
Hi, hello, everyone.
Yes. So it's so glad that you could join us. I think this is the first time Cupertino does this conversation with legislators that we hope it's a good beginning. Thank you.
It's a great thing to do. I'm glad you're doing it. And many years ago, when I was a city council member, the Cities Association did something like this over in Mountain View with not only their city council members, but with others who were invited. And the legislators at that time ended up getting some pretty good ideas to work on. So I'm sure Assemblymember Lowe, like me, is looking forward to, hearing what thoughts you have.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Senator Cortese. And with that, I think that we can provide you and Assemblymember Lowe until approximately the top of the hour, a little bit further than that, to provide your updates of the last legislative session, if you choose. So we've allocated half an hour for both of you. So each roughly 15 minutes to give us your sense of where we stand legislatively after this last session, and anything else you wish to share with the Cupertino Council and our community. So I think we're neutral as to who goes first. And so if you want me to flip a coin, I'm happy to do that. But I'm sure our state representatives can work it out amongst themselves as to who goes first here.
Oh no, there's a process here. The Senate always must go first. We allow the Senate, please, by all means.
Unless the bill is introduced in the assembly, and then the assembly. So, you know what? Just to save time from a lengthy debate between the two of us as to who goes first, I'll go ahead and concede Assemblymember Lowe's point. Excuse me. We might have to grab a glass of water here along the way. Excuse me. So let me just say, I think both of us know that, and I'm going to speak for myself, but I think we both know that the issue of housing, you know what, I'm going to defer to Assemblymember Lowe. I'm going to have to get a drink of water. So I guess my throat decided for itself. So
we're tag teaming today, Dave. No worries. No worries.
Defer. I'll be right back. I'm going to go grab a glass of water. Thank you.
Well, thanks again. First of all, thank you very much for your hospitality, and also acknowledgement, Vice Mayor, too, about the importance of our democracy. This is actually how the system is set up, for us to have thoughtful dialogue and set up a system in place where, of course, there naturally will be disagreements, but of course we find much more in commonality. And I look forward to helping to shepherd that through and making sure that our region is well represented in Sacramento as well. But what's most troubling to me is, and I would value your input as well too, which is that of a disconnect between that of where our residents and our electorate is with respect to our public institutions and what we value in our community. As we all well know, it's the city budget as well as the state budget is a reflection of our values. And when we think about what keeps our community here in Cupertino thriving, much of it is due to the great community and education and school districts. Of course, we know that it was painstaking and heartbreaking to see that there were specific school closures, and yet you had members of the community, and still do, wishing to keep them open. But the conversation is really, how do we ensure that we pay for the services that we wish to receive? So I would welcome your insights as to some of the policy proposals. And there is one that I'm in conversations with a number of colleagues, which is to lower the thresholds so that local jurisdictions can raise the resources should they decide to put it on the ballot and residents wish to do it. As you know, sometimes it takes the 2/3 and the higher threshold to pass a revenue measure. But of course, we do care about trying to help support as much local control as possible. So I welcome your insights and engagement on how we might be able to help partner and think about the type of resources for our community here in Cupertino.
Okay, great. Is that a passing of the baton to Senator Cortese, Assemblymember Lowe? Or
sure. Well, that was just kind of a main issue that I would welcome your. I don't want to just to be talking to you, which I'd rather value your input as well in our limited time.
Oh, sure. I mean, I'm happy to try to moderate it back and forth. But I'm sure once we start taking you up on that, it'll be a blink of an eye and it'll be 9:30. So let's let me open that up. We're roughly kind of dividing this into 15-minute increments between Assemblymember Lowe and Senator Cortese. Would anyone like to take up Assemblymember Lowe on the offer to just give some points or a point on what you see as particularly keen and valuable? Vice Mayor Chow, you have your hand raised.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for the question, Evan. So I would like to share actually this screen. This shows the per student revenue trend Cupertino gets the red line, which is way below the average of the rest of the state. We are at the bottom 2% of the entire state in terms of per student revenue. And as there are other schools get more revenue, the gap becomes bigger, as you can see. So, and our living cost in Bay Area is the highest in the entire state. As a result, and Cupertino is a unique area that families in Cupertino are those families who stretch their budget to afford a better school district, but they cannot afford Palo Alto and Menlo Park. So they are stretched to their limit. As a result, the school district couldn't even get the parcel tax to pass. It doesn't matter if it's 50% or 75%. It's a matter of whether people can afford it. I think in Palo Alto, you can see that they can easily pass a few $100s of parcel tax, and Saratoga too, but in Cupertino, it's just harder. Our families are affluent, but not as affluent as people can see. They are two-income workers. They need that two-income to afford this area. So able to pass tax really doesn't solve the problem. We need is equitable education funding that adjusts to the living cost that we have to pay here in terms of not only the teacher salary, but all the cost that our school district have to do. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Vice Mayor. Let me go, and Assembly Member, did you want to speak to that before we go to Councilmember Moore?
Oh, please, Councilmember Moore.
Okay, thank you. I echo what the Vice Mayor has said here, and I was wondering if Vice Mayor Chow might have the precinct count numbers for the parcel tax that failed. I think that those numbers were pretty devastating, and overall, I think that the concept of fixing our funding and working on the funding strategy and making it more equitable would definitely be welcome here.
Thank you, Councilmember Moore. So I guess those are a couple of perspectives on education. And so Councilmember Lowe, let me try to do this. I know that this is a set of topics that will be covered by our staff presentation from Katie Nomura. But just high level, we have 6. We have fiscal responsibility, local control, sustainability, education, infrastructure and mobility, and a healthy, safe, and resilient community as the pillars of our legislative platform. Did you hear anything there that you think you'd like to speak to? Just respecting everyone's time. So we'll transition over to Senator Cortese in about 5 minutes or so. But were there any items there that you'd like to kind of share with us? I know we kind of couched it as, tell us about your last legislative session, but if you have thoughts on that, we're, really happy to, hear from each and every one of those topics, of course, in the rather constrained amount of time we have with you. But I just thought I'd throw that out there in the effort of getting some initial thoughts there.
Yeah, well, the other thing that I just want to remind you as well, too, is an actionable item, which is to say that we were successful, Senator Cortese and I, able to help deliver resources and funds in partnership with the West Valley mayors and managers to go directly towards Cupertino as well. So if there are some budgetary items that would be helpful to fund with respect to infrastructure, otherwise, please keep us apprised, as we are in that moment right now of budget augmentations and also the asks. So I hope that you'll help us try to identify other areas to which we can fund with respect to the budget. And then with respect to the legislative proposals, of course, you have your strong legislative advocates who have retained, who I know have great experience in this realm too, to keep us posted on opportunities to which you can also weigh in, not just in terms of resolutions, but also through the League of Cities as well.
Got it. Great. Well, thank you, Assemblymember Lowe. I mean, one point I'll note is that, and there are so many prongs of the legislative platform, but the concept of unfunded mandates, right? Basically saying, go and do this, right? California realized through its first stab at electric cars, right? You can't just tell people make electric cars. We tried to do that in the 90s. And, you just kind of thinking about all these various moving parts. But I mean, that the housing equation could be seen as something of a directive for unfunded mandates. And to the extent that it's not, a lot of the times what we're looking at on the local level is, a cost benefit analysis between we in Cupertino, for instance, are looking at very lucrative office space, right? And so we look at, the ability to economically pay for it from the perspective of legislation and development, but we're also kind of scratching our head and going, well, if we're putting so much office space and that, motivates a requirement for so much more housing than is actually put in there. I mean, personally, I look at it from a transportation perspective. What are your thoughts on that going forward in terms of, what makes sense to advocate for? Because I think we can all agree that, housing is a really necessary and important, topic to focus upon. And there are equities, concerned. We have a growing homelessness situation going on in the state and locally. And we all want to be able to, in good faith, be able to successfully, address these issues. But where's your head at with regard to, kind of thinking about, how do we successfully address this in its totality in the long run? When you talk about some money, but of course, and the money is of course welcome, but is it enough to be able to, in this situation, solve the housing crisis? And so what are your thoughts on that as a general concept? Where do we go from here, right? I mean, we've got the local control issue, we've got unfunded mandates, we've got a massive need for, the funding to really solve this problem. Where do you see it, going at this particular crossroads?
One of the opportunities that I felt was to sort of recognize the roles as well. The Assembly District encompasses four different, this new one encompasses four different cities. The large one is San Jose. So to the extent possible that Cupertino can help shepherd and push through a regional approach, whether it be through the West Valley mayors and managers or otherwise, I think that's a stronger advocacy position to help ensure that we see things at a wider level. Of course, Cupertino is unique in its own type of philosophy and distinct in that nature, but to the extent possible that the regionalism, and I know that you and I have talked about that, Mayor Paul, which is to how do we get other cities to help advocate in that regard and getting that type of support that smaller cities see as important. Because the fact is that when we look at a statewide approach, part of the thing when you talk about, for example, the local control funding formula, we talk about the inequities of other underserved communities as well, and how difficult it is in a limited piece of the pie. Rather, how do we expand the pie? And that oftentimes is difficult. So we talk about a wide variety of issues of the equity. And that's frankly the challenge that Senator Cortese and I face, which is that many of our colleagues throughout the state legislature do not necessarily look at Silicon Valley as a community that needs resources. That's an unfortunate reality. Of course, all of us on this Zoom think very differently and will advocate strongly against that type of philosophy, because we can cite statistics and data points to help address the issue of poverty and also the challenges that we need. So that's what I would say is important, that we continue these conversations and also help elevate it so that other local communities help shepherd that conversation as well.
Well, thank you, Assemblymember Lowe. And at this time, let me transition it to Senator Cortese. Dave, thank you very much for being here. Great to see you. It's an interesting point that Assemblymember Lowe brings up with regard to equities. I mean, we're often perceived out here as being extremely fortunate, and I think we all stipulate, to that. But of course, when it comes down to equities and factors that affect everyone, for instance, you often hear in the broader conversation from an environmental equity perspective that oftentimes you see the more disenfranchised populations being near sources of pollution. But of course, we know in the West Valley that that's not something that is limited just to particular, geographies. And in fact, we have had what may be the Bay Area's certainly top three highest polluters in the outskirts of Cupertino, partly inside of our city for a number of years. And so, do you have reflections on that from kind of looking at your work in not just, of course, in this past term, because everyone knows that you have a very long history of service to the community, to Santa Clara County. And with regard to any points of advice or points of collaboration to share with the Cupertino community, Senator Cortese, would you care to speak on that, perhaps in addition to some of the summaries from this last legislative session that you care to share?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mayor, and all of you again. And I got my voice back. I don't know what happened there. I just came rushing in from outside, as usual, from another meeting. And I went to start talking, and obviously I needed a glass of water. So got that taken care of. I think to directly speaking to this question, the Assemblymember Lowe is raising a really good point in terms of there are a lot of things that we need to we have to have a united front on. And the thing that you just brought up, Mayor Paul, is exactly in that category. Assemblymember and I have been fighting and fighting and fighting inside as part of what we call the Bay Area Caucus against the attempt by just about everyone else in the state to use a screening device called EnviroScreen to decide, who gets money. And it isn't just like who gets environmental money, it's who gets money, okay? And in so many different areas. And our objection has been, look, no good deed goes unpunished. EnviroScreen is basically a formula that your city manager is probably very familiar with, if not the council, that says that where you have environmental concerns, hazmat, toxicity, whatever, air quality problems, and you have communities, what I would call communities of concern, low-income census tracts or low-income zip codes combined, you combine those factors, and therefore a disproportionate amount of our budget or our bond or our state resiliency money or whatever needs to go there. Well, the reason that's no good deed goes unpunished when it comes to Silicon Valley is because we have a very integrated community. You're not going to find census tracts here. In that, I speak in not just as someone who represents Cupertino, but somebody who represents East San Jose as well, where I bet you there's some stereotypes in the Valley that think, oh yeah, East San Jose, you could find big stretches of certain ethnicity, of a certain poverty level, and probably, a lot of hazmat problems. Not really. We have country clubs that are right next to low-income census tracts, and then we have, other affluent areas that are right next to a general aviation airport that is apparently spewing lead on everyone. But that screening device doesn't take that into account because it's saying, we want to look at your whole community and see if you're having all these problems. Well, we don't here, right? I think that's what some of you are saying is we don't have an area like East LA or Compton, California here in the Silicon Valley where you could just look as far as you could see and see poverty or communities of concern, but we still have them. So why don't we get credit for that? And why don't we get credit for the fact that we are living side by side and we were working side by side amongst one of the most diverse communities in the world with poorer people and wealthier people side by side working together. We don't get any credit for that. So why do I raise all that? Not to be speaking political philosophy here. This is very real. It has to do with who gets what money from the state. And, the assembly member is, in part, he wasn't talking about that particular device, that particular index, but saying, maybe there's things like that you can work with San Jose on, even though you may have differences in other areas, maybe even on housing policy, but on something like that, we need the region to be united. It helps us if you're united. It's a powerful thing if Cupertino and Campbell and San Jose and Milpitas and everybody's coming forward saying, we're not going to accept this. Your legislators are saying that, but we're outnumbered, right? There's a lot more legislators in Southern California who actually like that formula, right? And not everywhere in the Bay Area is even as integrated as us. You may recall when we were rolling out vaccine, the state was, and they decided to try to catch up with the Asian community and with the Latinx community. And so they wanted to go find those areas and put extra vaccine there. You know how much Santa Clara County got? How much, Assembly Member? 0, right? Right? And we had to go on a call, he and I, to the governor's office and say, there's no way that you can say that you need to catch up these demographics, these ethnic, they were going on basically poverty and ethnicity, and leave the entire county of Santa Clara out of getting any extra vaccine. We didn't even get 1 dose until we complained. And they said, well, the index we're using says that all the equity needs are elsewhere, not Santa Clara County. So these are issues, like I said, they're real issues, in not any less important than some of the ones that have been more high profile lately, like housing, but they're real issues that can cost our region and our sub-region literally millions, if not billions of dollars, if we're not putting on a united front and fighting real hard to get our fair share.
Well, thank you, Senator Cortese. And, I'm really moved and affected by that phrase you used at the outset of your comments here, the idea of no good deed goes unpunished, because I think that's a pretty deeply felt sentiment throughout, our region here. And you see it in history as well. A long time ago when we weren't getting federal money for, the local transit infrastructure, Santa Clara County, of course, built the expressway system, with local monies. And, even to today, when from Caltrans, we're not necessarily getting our, proportional representation of money to clean up the litter along the highways, for instance, in this 10-year cycle. We're asking questions from Santa Clara County, what can we be doing affirmatively from our local citizenry and our local base to try to, just get the stuff cleaned up ourselves. And so, it's just something I think, and if you look at it from the housing and transportation perspective, kind of the question is, how do we not create these types of disincentives for things like really good transit, right? Because right now we do have state legislation that goes there and says, if you have a 15-minute bus stop, you're going to force density, you're going to take away, local land use authority. And so it kind of begs the question, how do we create actually functional transit in an environment where the electorate is savvy enough to realize what not even that good of transit means in terms of local entitlement authority? I think we all hear you with regard to a united front and working together, but in the context of, people that are kind of looking at this and looking at it sideways and going, well, what incentive would we have, right, to really solve these types of infrastructural problems, which could, writ large, not only solve our local housing problem, but solve, say, the economic woes of the Central Valley if we could build out an effective enough transit system throughout the entire state. So thoughts on that going forward in terms of, really kind of efficacious working together and making sure that we're pulling from the wherewithal, which is very considerable. I mean, I think anyone will concede that the abilities, individually and collectively represented by our areas are really quite vast. How do we get to the point where we're having what I think everyone would consider, sensible legislative discussions without kind of like, the mudslinging and, the ideas of trying to, delve into sound bites and, the kind of might makes right. I have the money, I'll go ahead and, kind of punch this through sort of idea. So I know it's a lot to pack into one question, but your thoughts on those general themes.
I think we spend at times, and don't take this as any judgment of you or Cupertino or anything. Let's talk about all of us in the world of politics. We spend a little too much time sometimes focusing on the negative things that we don't want to have happen anymore, instead of building upon the positive things that we've established as really good models. Let me just say, the RIDE program, I think Cupertino's part of that, but it's certainly in the West Valley and North County cities. That's a tremendous, nimble transportation program subsidized by the county itself, which gets seniors, older adults, to senior nutrition centers and whatnot. It should be built on. It should be expanded. It doesn't even exist basically in San Jose, certainly not in East San Jose. And I wish we had it. I would like, again, united front. I think we should all be saying, you know, we're probably going to fight forever and a day as to whether too much money is going to BART or whether too much money is going to light rail. But right now, we can establish an expanded version of the RIDE program, nimble, small buses that move our older adults, our seniors around for the nutrition they need and the mobility that they need. Let's go fight for that. And frankly, I just think, as an example, the West Valley cities can hold that up as an innovative, very endorsable program that, as you know, hey, we're out in front on this, you know, and frankly, you know, some of my colleagues on the Board of Supervisors were instrumental in really pushing that at the time. Fine, credit to them. So it's just an example of, you know, Assembly member and I, you know, he discovered that there's, you know, fire communication systems, these Moses systems, they cost a lot of money. They cost a lot of money, millions. But he found out that if you go in and fight for that and you fight for earmarks, there's not enough money or enough of those devices for the whole state. But he figured out we can perhaps get Silicon Valley, get my district represented, or maybe even overrepresented instead of shortchanged compared to the rest of the state. He taught me that when I was a supervisor still. I became a senator. The first thing I did was sit down with our majority leader, and as the budget was coming through, and I think this is what he was talking about earlier, it's budget time right now, you know, and I said, how many more of these Moses systems can we get? Because if there's fire here, and last year there was on both sides of the valley, or a little more than a year ago, and we start losing cell towers and we can't communicate with each other, it's scary. People are like literally scared in Saratoga, in the Elm Rock foothills, et cetera. They are scared in Cupertino. This is something you can do right now. Let's get these systems. They're on wheels. Let's give them to our firefighters, and let's not worry about what LA is doing. Let's just get our share or more than our share. And
Absolutely.
I think we've done that. So those are two examples of what I, you know, again, we can be unified on that. We can fight for something we can get right now. And we can put those other larger issues that seem intractable aside for the moment and focus on what can we do.
Sure, of course. Well, thank you very much, Senator Cortese. You know, we're also very proud in Cupertino of our VIA shuttle program, which is quite, you know, similar to RIDE and also expandable. Of course, you know, county as well as all the jurisdictions in the county have been working on the Silicon Valley Regional Interoperability Authority. Councilmember Willie has been our representative to SVRIA. And so, you know, it's great to see, I would say, at least 95% of the great things that are happening. Otherwise, we wouldn't be the region that we are. Senator Cortese, do you mind if I bring it over to a couple of our council members to kind of round out your time? So let's go in the other direction, first with Councilmember Moore and then with Vice Mayor Chow. You'll each have about a minute or so before we bring this over to Katie to provide that brief presentation as to the council's priorities that it's been working on in this last session. I think it's quite appropriate as well because of the fact that Councilmember Moore and Vice Mayor Chow comprise our Legislative Review Committee. And Councilmember Way, I did see your hand was raised. And so if you want to keep it up, please feel free to do so. We can just kind of divvy out that time accordingly. Okay, so about a minute each. Councilmember Moore.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Paul. I just wanted to kind of add on to your comments about the RIDE program. I believe that's $140 per trip. And the VIA program, we have just directed staff to seek grant money in order to expand that program into surrounding cities. Hopefully that will work its way out. And that for VIA, it's about $43 per trip, if I recall correctly from the presentation. So I think we're onto something pretty good here, and hopefully we'll get the grant funding and we'll be able to do that expansion.
Thank you, Councilmember Moore. Vice Mayor Chow, and I do see Councilmember Willie has a hand raised. So Vice Mayor Chow, if you make your comments concise, we can get to Councilmember Willie before we get to Katie.
Yeah. Responding to the question about what kind of funding that might help Cupertino, yeah, via shuttle, if there is state funding to incentivize that so that more cities could join, that would be great. Another thing is electrification of appliances and car chargers for garages. I think our residents have voiced that if we would like to go to for electrification, circuits needs to be changed. So if there is state funding to incentivize that, that would be great. And then we would like to support more home ownership. If there is grant for first-time home buyers and funding for ADUs, we have ADU program now. Not a lot of people can afford to build. So if there is incentive funding for that, and earthquake retrofit. A lot of city facilities have been postponing retrofit for earthquake because we don't have that funding. And I wonder if that's something that the state could help. And the inclusive playground is something our residents really would like to have another one. We got one partially funded by the county. This would provide playground for kids with disability. Another thing that the city is working on, we are identify the site for developmentally disabled people. So if we can get state funding for that, it's a city-owned site. If we can get state funding for that project, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Chow. And just to clarify, that's for housing for the ELI, extremely low income development.
Yeah, that's for housing.
Great. Councilmember Willie, let's go to you briefly before we go to the presentation from Katie.
Yeah, so thank you, Evan. Thank you, Dave, for coming. I'm real big engagement and, talking one-on-one. The one I would like to try to put more focus on is, housing, the housing shortage. We have this housing shortage by all means, but the community sees the way that Sacramento is going is taking away the local control with a one-size-fits-all approach. Really, it's being something that does not sound like democracy. And okay, let's just look at the housing shortage and problem. It's got two factors, two big factors. It's got many factors, but two big ones. The constant addition of more office, which we are truly trying to slow down. If we just talk about that for an instance, Tesla expanding in Texas. Sacramento has the carrot to use to get campuses from our big employers, Facebook, eBay, you name it, to put campuses in Tracy, Modesto, Stockton. By all means, we want vibrant Silicon Valley, but not to the extent of Sacramento is going to dictate that it's going to be changed in an undemocratic way. The other factor, big factor in housing, outside investors, and a lot of them being overseas, see our residential units as investment opportunities and come in. We just saw one on the news yesterday, buying up 12,000 residential units, something like $3 billion. Residential units are not intended to be treated like that. What it does is it pushes more people into rentals. And so, again, I believe you have carrot to change how that dynamic is allowed. And the result could be reduced housing shortage in a way that the communities truly feel. I hear communities, I hear the residents saying they're not opposed to growth, reasonable growth, sustainable growth, but when it's just mandated, our 20,000 residential units are going to have to expand by 25%. 25% in a short period of time. Never has that been imposed and been able to be done in a reasonable way. So I'd like to put that out there. I hope you will, really start looking at those factors and make it a shared work rather than taking away the local control and saying, this is what you'll do. So
Thank you, Councilmember Willie. So let's do this. We are kind of cutting into, time for the council members, but, the next section of this was really the discussion of the council priorities as well. And so Katie had about 7 minutes. We allocated a total of 25. And so I'll just make sure that we're within that time period overall. So let's go to Councilmember Way, who had her hand raised as well. Councilmember Way, did you want to provide some comments before Katie?
A real short comment. I want to thank Evan and Dave to come. And then I know we have a lot of wish list. But I do like to build on what Senator Cortese says, that let's concentrate on the ones that's working and then expand that, whether it's transportation, housing, education, or ride share. So I like to share some successes, and I like, Evan and Dave to share them, and then so we can build on it. So thank you.
Hey, great. Thanks, Councilmember Way. And so let's go ahead and turn it to Katie. So Katie, thanks for providing the presentation twice. And so this will be the legislative priorities for council as developed over the course of the last couple of sessions.
Great. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and council members. And we're greatly appreciative of Assemblymember Lowe and Senator Cortese's presence here. So I will try to move quickly through the presentation. This is the council's legislative priorities for 2022. It is a much more intensive document, but we have tried to encapsulate it in its summary. So as the mayor mentioned earlier, there are guiding principles: fiscal responsibility, local control, sustainability, education, infrastructure, and mobility that includes transportation, and a healthy, safe, and resilient community. For fiscal responsibility, we believe that it's important for us to safeguard resources for our community and city to provide services to the community, as well as to make sure that these revenue sources are available. We would oppose unfunded mandates. The city continues to support local control and is increasingly concerned about the number of legislative proposals seeking to circumvent or preempt appropriate local authority. This includes housing and land use. We would support legislation that positively addresses housing shortages in communities without unintended consequences of one-size-fits-all solutions. So we are supportive of addressing the housing issue, but we do believe that the best decisions are made at the local level. We would oppose, again, efforts to erode local control and public hearing oversight. And we would support legislation for state funding for construction of affordable housing. In sustainability, Cupertino is lucky to be a leader in sustainability, and we would support policies that emphasize sustainable development, improve environmental standards and regulatory processes, and promote sustainable energy policies. We would also appreciate any financial support for preservation of natural resources, organic waste recycling, and landfill diversion. As you've heard earlier, education is very important to the city, and we support adequate funding to ensure that every child has a quality education and can be successful. Infrastructure and mobility. We support legislation and policies that provide funding for transit solutions to increase the speed and frequency of services, funding for opportunities for maintenance and repair, as well as investments in maintenance or rehabilitation of aging infrastructure, and to allow expansion to support the city's smart growth principles. For a healthy, safe, and resilient community, this includes looking out for our vulnerable populations, such as economically disadvantaged, elderly, homeless, and disabled, among others. We support state and federal assistance for local law enforcement, as well as any measures that could contribute to public safety and mental well-being. We would also support, in light of the recent events, strengthening of local disaster preparedness and emergency planning and response activities. So thank you for hearing the brief presentation, and I'll turn it back over to the mayor.
Thank you very much, Katie. And so just to give everyone a time check, we stand at 7:14, and I want to just make sure that we are, adherent to the idea of letting our legislators loose at 8 o'clock. So thank you very much for being here. We will go ahead and bring this to council at until 7:28, and then we'll bring it back to our legislators to kind of give us some feedback for about 20 minutes after that before we bring it to our members of the public who have comments at that point. And so let me open it up to our city council to see if there are any topics that they'd like to highlight. Until I see hands raised, I'll go ahead and start. I mean, I think that transportation and transit is just it's so incredibly important to the health and vibrancy of our future. Like a lot of people, I would love to see California have a modern transit system and to be able to provide the housing that it needs, to provide to all of its residents, to be able to address the homeless crisis, because of course that's the crux of the crisis. For people who are unhoused, who are living within the elements. That's precisely what things like our Measure A money should be focusing on first and foremost. I think in Cupertino we may well have that opportunity to have a significant Measure A project in the relatively near future. It would be great to see that kind of support. But when it comes to transportation, I really mean it. I think we should not be creating disincentives to create good quality public transit. And, I also think that we happen to, be one of the core economic engines of the world. And, I also think that if you're really looking at it objectively, that's absolutely true. No one can really dispute that. But we also have, 15 cities in the county that are really not interconnected by a transit system. I'm looking at BART going into downtown San Jose. And from the perspective of a board member of the VTA for, this year and last year, before I term out of office, I mean, I think it's a great thing. It's a very expensive thing, right? The federal government has come up with a new estimate, as the Mercury News very helpfully pointed out, as to how much it would cost. But, the fact of the matter is, high quality transit in this area and the entire Bay Area has been something that's been a couple of generations going on now. So, I mean, if we look, 10 years down the line, we have a lot of opportunities potentially, to build out a system. And so I'd love to see our local legislators kind of looking at it from that perspective and going, you know what, if we have that wherewithal in 10 years, where can that take us? So, and also how do we create, incentives to create a, world-class transit system so that we're not just taking care of for the next 10 or 20 years, but 50 years and even a century into the future. And I don't think it's too tall of an order to ask for, given, who we are and what we do. So let me take this over to Vice Mayor Chow, followed by Councilmember Wei at this point. Vice Mayor Chow.
Okay, thank you. So first I'd like to take this rare opportunity to correct certain potential misconception about Cupertino. I think the reason Councilmember Whaley mentioned local control is not that we want to control things. I think we have a common goal. We want to build housing. But the thing is, when we have more control, we would able to negotiate more below market rate units. But then when we don't have that control, we find out is developers are able to escape trying to build less and less below market rate units. And for Cupertino, actually, we approved the we had 5 housing element sites for this cycle, and all 5 sites have approved the project entitled, but only 1 was built. So even though our allocation is about 1,000 units, we have approved almost 4,000 units, but only 300 some units are built. So out of 1,000 units, 30% in terms of permitted. So the question is not really how much we can approve. The question is the market condition somehow does not allow the developers to want to build in Cupertino for whatever reason. And then all we could do is approve. So we are not anti-housing, and all of these projects that we have approved, there was no opposition except Vocal project, because it produced a huge office park that would generate a demand of at least 6,000, maybe 10,000 extra housing units. That was the only project when we had opposition. The rest of the housing projects didn't really receive too much opposition. So I hope that you come away knowing this about Cupertino. We want to do our job, and as a result, we don't want to build too much office. we want to perform and do housing, but we need that help. We need to be able to produce below market rate housing. We need funding. Then in terms of transit, we are a transit desert. Whether you say it's a transit corridor or not, the reality is the bus service that is almost non-existent. So when a lot of state bills take away parking for our residents, that means there is no other option except more congested roadways. So we need to be practical about that. And in terms of education, I'd like to clarify. I think my chart probably was not clear. In Cupertino, per student funding is about $8,500, when the state average is about $10,000. But if you look at the city around Cupertino, Palo Alto's per student funding is about $18,000. Santa Clara is $22,000 per student, 2.5 times of the per student funding of Cupertino. That's how inequitable it is for Cupertino students. And
well, Vice Mayor Chow, let me bring it over, and if we have additional time, we'll bring it back for you to finish. Let's go to Councilmember Wei and then Councilmember Moore.
Thank you, Mayor Paul. So, I said that that's built on successes, but also we need to aim high. So, one thing our state legislature can think of is, what can you do to collaboratively with federal, state, and city fundings plus private fundings to really make our region transportation advanced? I mean, that could be a 10, 20, 2 decades goal, but if we don't start now, it's never going to happen. So transportation is so important for our region. It connects housing, it connects jobs. So what can we aim? How high can we aim in the next decade or 2 decades? So I think on the state legislature level, you have the ability to do that. Pool private and public funding together and really work and aim high. And second is, we ask you this and we ask you that. What, in your opinion, what local control truly is? What can local municipalities like Cupertino do to contribute to our housing crisis, our traffic situations, or our homelessness? What are the responsible ways that you would want the city officials to do? That's what I would like to know.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Wei. And let's go to Councilmember Moore.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Paul. So we actually are working on a single-use plastics ordinance here. So that's something that's coming in the future, but it would be great if there was something that was statewide and more far-reaching. Something that will be coming to the Legislative Review Committee here is AB 1603, which will help address safety and change the shoplifting amount. And so I hope you're looking into that with the number of smash and grabs that have happened across the state and the impact of changing that dollar amount from $950 down to I believe $450, and then this would I've got it backwards, $450 up to $950, and now this AB 1603 would bring it back down to $400. With regards to building affordable housing in Cupertino, we have a 19-unit project called the Veranda, 350 square feet for each unit. Those cost $780,000 to build. For our new RENA cycle, we have almost 1,900 BMR units, which we need to build. That's going to have a significant price tag. So providing funding to help that affordable housing get actually built would be very helpful. And then if you are interested offline, the Valco SB 35 project, it's been mentioned about the amount of office, which it has. It has a 2/3 residential calculation requirement. And because of how that was done, counting parking garages for residential area, not counting it on the office side, you could end up, which we did, with a project which is going to worsen the housing shortage conservatively by 3,410 residential units. And additionally, because it bypassed the CEQA process, we're in kind of this odd legal space where the developer has agreed to have regulatory oversight from Santa Clara County Department of Environmental Health. There is extensive contamination across the site, and that's why when you drive by, you don't see anything happening at Valco. They are still doing studies to determine what the sources of the PERC contamination is on the site, and so that's one of the issues with the timing of this project. So if you want to talk about this offline, I have suggestions for how it could be improved so this doesn't happen again, because for the totality of that project, it's about 10 million square feet of development on 50 acres. By comparison, and that's including the parking garages, by comparison, Apple headquarters, that was 6.9 million square feet of development if you include their parking garages on 176 acres. So you have a visual of that. You've seen the Apple campus, you know what it looks like. So you can imagine what we're looking at Valco. So I would like if there could be some cap following what's in CEQA for projects which are of regional, area-wide, or statewide significance. And those projects have numerical values in the guidelines of 500 residential units and 250,000 square feet of office. And I will leave it with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Moore. And Councilmember Willie, we have a couple of minutes for council. I could wrap up, or if you wanted to.
Well, in some respects, I'm kind of hoping to hear more from Evan and Dave about how they feel Sacramento can help with the housing shortage, as opposed to the Senate bills that simply take the local control away. And again, I've tossed out a couple. One, incentivizing to put camp in outlier areas, or reducing the ability for residential properties to be treated as commodities by those with money. So, what thoughts? What thoughts do you have about how you can help with the housing shortage?
Well, thanks, Councilmember Willie. Before we transition back to Senator Cortese and Assemblymember Lowe, let me just reiterate all of our thanks. I think we're just really grateful that you're here this evening and are taking the time to talk to us. And across the board, talking is great. I mean, we need definitively more of that, throughout the country. And I think this is a wonderful step. One thing I'll say is that, I think we all know on some level that, we're extremely fortunate, and, building upon what our successes are is a wonderful idea. And it's something that we have to do, all the way through. I think intuitively, when we're in Cupertino, we tend to get into the mode of, let's not look back, let's not rest on our laurels, let's just kind of keep on looking at the problems. And it may seem like kind of like scab picking, right? And just trying to pick on those sore points. What I've experienced, is that ultimately that's what makes us better. And I want to express our deep-rooted appreciation for what you guys do, Senator Cortese and Assemblymember Lowe, in the context of now that you're in Cupertino, sitting with us here this evening. We want to do the exact same thing. I mean, developers, I think of late have gotten the understanding and experience that by working with our community and with our council, it actually does make their projects better. Because, it's not like we're flippantly talking about things that, don't matter or are, illegitimate concerns. So, aspirationally, we'd love to hear your thoughts, on community building and building off the successes, of course. And to the extent that, you have thoughts on the ideas that are really kind of the intractable problems, right? I mean, it's a vast economic opportunity. We've created a real engine here. And so how do you satisfy the needs of, people that really want to further capitalize off of it, but also kind of view it as something that is a real economic opportunity balanced against the needs of equity and the pressures attendant with, having created a very successful area. So with that, let me bring it back. Is there a preference in order of either the senator or assembly member in terms of how we yield the floor?
Assembly Member Lowe, it's his turn. I was the last one to speak, so we'll toggle back to him.
That's great. Thank you, Senator. I hope that, Senator, you also make reference of our joint legislative proposal that you were kind enough to allow me to co-author in the Assembly to help ensure that we have open dialogue with respect to the Brown Act, but something that we've unfortunately seen in one of our sister cities just neighboring in our West Valley cities in Los Gatos, but something we're trying to shepherd through. And so I know Senator Cortese will leave some time to be able to do that. And I would welcome your support and engagement on that, not just here in Cupertino, but also the Cities Association, the Peninsula Division, and also the League of Cities as well. With respect to just legislative process too, I'm inspired, Mayor Paul, that all 5 council members have fully participated and have a wide variety of different proposals. And in fact, I've jotted these all down, and I hope that we can follow up with their staff to help prioritize. This is also the art of the possible. And so I want to be as open and direct to help refine some of these proposals so that we can put our collective efforts, both Senator Cortese in the Senate and myself in the Assembly, to try to find what we might be able to do. Similarly, as I've offered to you, Mayor Paul, and as I do to the entire City Council and the city, is that there are respective policy committee staffs of the respective policies in the legislature. And so when we're talking about other proposals, just immediately I can sense that there will be support and or pushback depending on who the chair of the specific committee is. Does that person reside and hail from Northern California or Southern California, from an urban community or suburban community alike? Those nuances matter. And so how are we also open and honest and transparent about the likelihood of these proposals? And perhaps sometimes it's not a standalone bill, but perhaps we can help shepherd things in through a budget proposal and or adding this amendment of specific language that can help shepherd through the policies that Cupertino desires and wishes. That's not a standalone policy as well too. So again, I know that you have good boots on the ground to help you get you this information in real time, but those are some strategic approaches that we can do to tackle some of these issues. And of course, when we think about some of the carrots that might exist to help flush out what the existing legislative proposals might be, and perhaps something that you would be able to work with your city staff as well too, to find out what specific language or specific proposals that we might be able to put in an existing piece of legislation to be able to get some of those incentives that you would interpret accordingly. So we keep ourselves readily available.
Well, thank you, Assemblymember Lowe. It's a really wonderful open door offer. And, with the work of our LRC, I'm sure that, keeping the channel open to your office and to yourself, it would be really valuable to be able to soundboard off your insights and the insights of your staff as to, what the particular nuances of, specific measure happens to be. So really great. So let me segue it over to Senator Cortese.
Well, the first thing I would say is, as to a lot of the priorities that you collectively showed us with the slides, PowerPoint, as well as the individual priorities that were more of a drill down on some of those things. A lot of that is invested in significantly in the budget that's on the table right now. And the legislature's coming through in a lot of those areas and trying to double down. Transportation is one of those. Just to give you an example, the governor put $3.3 billion in his budget for something called the Inner City Rail Program. And this is just one example. We could talk highways, we could talk other aspects of transportation. The Senate subcommittee on budget that deals with transportation is one that I sit on. So between me, the chair, Senator Durazo, Senator Newman, who's from Fullerton, the two of them are from Southern California, we all emphatically emphasize that number needs to be doubled. That needs to be doubled down. As to organized retail theft, I think that came up in the discussion. $85 million in the governor's budget for local cities and counties to grants for them to to help provide additional security, presumably in the form of off-duty police officers, reservists, or however that works, but to invest in that, I wouldn't be surprised if that number goes up before the May revise, and that it just depends. It depends a lot on your unity around that. Some of the legislators are saying, not the ones on my committee today, but we're hearing a little bit of, is this really necessary? Will this really work? Is this enough? I mean, again, I'm not sure why any city in Santa Clara County of the 15 wouldn't say, yes, it's necessary, and yes, give us more. It's another one of those things we can do right now if you feel, if all of you feel that that's the case. I heard at least one of you bring that up. Transportation investment is in, I think, hovering around $10 billion, if I remember right, in the base budget. Again, overall, not just, that isn't BART money, that's overall. That number, again, will likely increase, but the odds of it increasing, if we're hearing loudly from the cities, your association, League of Cities, and others, I think is more likely, not less likely. On land use, last year there were 31 bills signed into law. I'm not sure how much they're going to help housing production. I'll grant you that. I'm not sure that the tinkering with how many people could live on a lot subject to your objective zoning standards is going to produce much, because most of the cities, like you, have seen that the legislation allows you to apply height restrictions, setback restrictions, parking restrictions, design restrictions, and all those things that will maintain the character of your neighborhoods. That wasn't a loophole. I was a little not taken aback. I'm never taken aback by media reports, but no sooner did that language get installed in the bill and the bill got signed, saying that the cities will retain all of their objective zoning rights on a bill like SB 9, but and some of you started to go down that path, rightfully so. I talked to the mayor myself and said, why wouldn't you go and update your zoning standards right now to make sure you're happy with how this bill is going to play out in your community? And I know that you're doing that, but I don't think it's appropriate for the press to report that as that you're exploiting a loophole. I know Evan Lowe will agree with me 100% on this. Those bills are vetted forward, backward, multiple committees. They go through hoop upon hoop upon hoop. The assembly members and the senators have to stand in front of committee after committee and defend and debate and argue these bills. Then they go to the floor. There is no such thing as a loophole in these bills. Those objective zoning standards were put into SB 9 on purpose. It wasn't a loophole, because legislators from up and down the state, rural, suburban, urban, said, we are not going to go back to our local governments and tell them that you didn't put that into the bill, that they don't have objective zoning rights anymore. So put it in. And the fact that you're following the bill and doing what you're allowed to do, perfectly appropriate. Now, if something does go awry with this, you got to let us know right away. But it's getting road tested right now, and you're doing your part. The state did what it thought was right. And, if there needs to be a course correction, obviously your legislator is going to be the first to want to know, right? Us right here from Silicon Valley, so we can go back and demand the fixes. On unfunded mandates, we have these things called appropriations committees. I don't know if that's the exact same term they use in the assembly, but any bill that so much as requires you to put an extra postage on an envelope typically gets put on something called suspense, meaning it's not going anywhere until somebody justifies how that expense is going to get paid. And typically, because the state can't just mandate that on you, there's a big discussion about whether the general fund needs to be revised at the state level to compensate you for that. And so I do think that once in a while, there's an unintended result. It feels like a mandate to some of you who said that. And I think with the land use, that because you're the ones that have to go activate and this is for the city manager especially, activate your planning departments, update your zoning, figure out how this is all going to work. No, the state didn't give you money for that. And I think that was a mistake. I think the state should have said, you know, this legislation was passed. You're going to have to react to it. You're going to perhaps have to put some things in place. And there should have probably, especially with the kind of surpluses we're seeing, been some dollars, you know, in grants and planning grants provided to local governments that felt they needed to adjust their zoning standards. Didn't happen. Had I thought that through early enough, I would have made a louder argument for it. But I did. I went to the pro tem, our Senate pro tem, Tony Atkins, and I said, you know, it's not too late. We can come back, you know, with budget we call trailer bill language and add in some money for the locals to help them with this. And maybe we can still do that, you know, in this session. But these are things, the more you ask and the more you present and give us real details about what this kind of stuff is costing you that's coming down from the state, the easier it is for your assembly members and state senators to go back and make that argument. And we're, I think, for the most part, happy to make the argument. So those are just a few, you know, a few responses to some of the things that you're referring to. There's a thing, lastly, this budget year, many of you talked about infrastructure, some transportation infrastructure. Many of you talked about education funding. Last year and this year, the Prop 98 guarantee, the floor on Prop 98 is going up by a larger number than ever before in the history of the state. It'll be another 20 billion this year going out to the schools, just in additional Prop 98 money, because the formula says when you have a surplus this big, first thing that happens is basically half the surplus comes right off the top and goes to Prop 98 for education. But we have this other thing called the Gan Limit. And the assembly member and I are all too familiar with this at this point. And remember Jarvis Gan, those of you who remember all the way back to Prop 13. Again, your city manager, I think, knows all about this and your staff. But the Gan limits, it says that the surplus that's left after you pay Prop 98, after you put the money into Prop 98, has to either go back to the taxpayers in the form of rebates, or it has to go back to the taxpayers in the form of more education funding or more infrastructure. Infrastructure. Think broadly. Think broadly in terms of infrastructure. And so now is the time to be asking for infrastructure. So actually, those of you who emphasize that in your comments, you're spot on. You couldn't have picked a better year to be focused on infrastructure investment. And again, you know, we're not like the little speaker, you know, person at the Jack in the Box where you can just say to Assembly Member Lowe or Senator Cortese, okay, take our order. This is what we want, and we can get it for you. I'm not suggesting that. But to the extent you or folks in the region here, you know, make a strong argument in terms of infrastructure investment that's common to the region, as one of you said, I think John said, if I can call you by your first name, that's going to allow us to go into our respective caucuses and make the argument that, you know, that is a key investment in this region. So the timing is great. As the assembly member said right when the call started, it's budget time. We can't guarantee what we can get for you, but we absolutely want to know more about your infrastructure priorities and your education priorities this year, especially because the money's going to get funneled that way, whether we like it or not. And I'll close with that.
Well, thank you, Senator Cortese. And so with regard to the timeline on that, to reach your respective offices with these budgetary requests, are we looking at more of a 4-week horizon, 6 weeks? What's sort of an internal deadline that we can set to be aware of those types of restrictions on the allocation availability?
Look, the Senate is going to have its budget retreats and caucuses and so forth the middle of next month. So we're about 3 weeks off. I don't know. I'll defer to Assembly Member Lowe on what their timing is.
Yeah, this is the respective time. The two houses will then make have an alignment of conversations on the respective proposals as well. So that's a realistic timeline.
Okay, great to know. Well, we are so appreciative. Do you mind if we bring it back to council with regard to maybe some quick follow-up comments? I'm keeping track of time, and we got another 4 minutes or so left. Assemblymember Lowe, if you wanted to wrap a bit, I know that Senator Cortese gave us some great information. He was right around his allocation of that 10 minutes or so. Did you want to put in an extra word or so?
If you don't mind, maybe just a 30-second plug, Senator Cortese. The piece of legislation that we're partnering on that specifically came Senate Bill 1100.
1100? Yeah. Okay.
Senate Bill 1100 on the Brown Act bill. It's important to all of you. It's important to the county. It's important to every commission that has to abide by the Brown Act in your city, in the other cities, up and down the state, in the sense that what we've done is gone back into the Brown Act, which was enacted in the 1950s. And what we are saying is the language that speaks to a disturbance of a meeting is too ambiguous, that it's become very difficult with the intense hostilities that we're seeing with people using language even that's not protected by the First Amendment, like fighting words that are intended to start a fight or start an insurrection, in our chambers. And frankly, that happened in Los Gatos. And I've seen it happen as a member of the Board of Supervisors at times. I don't know, I hope you don't have this experience often in Cupertino, but someone taking their shirt off and trying to charge the dais. It's pretty obvious in some of those cases that you can stop the meeting, you can end public comment, or you can eject the person. What if somebody comes into your chambers with 4x8 plywood signs, and what if 10 people do that? So nobody else can even see what's going on in the proceedings. So your security can't even see what's going on, and they start, chanting. What we're doing with this bill, SB 1100, the Assemblymember and I, is we're going in with the best legal minds that we have. And we're going to articulate much more clearly and take the ambiguity out of what and when you can do when you have these disruptions, and what actually constitutes the kind of disruption where you can not only gavel down the meeting, but order somebody ejected from the meeting if it's clear that they violated the criteria that we've established in the bill. So is it going to take some very careful fashioning the rest of the way? Yes, the bill's introduced. We know the rest of the way through this vetting process and committee process, we will get everything from, First Amendment advocates, which I dearly love, to, people who are going to be a little bit more on the other end of the spectrum, but we're going to make sure with this bill that the right to petition your council or any city council is preserved, that even speech that we don't agree with is a right that's still preserved. But we're going to create in the bill as much of a clear, bright line as possible to determine when somebody crosses over from acceptable speech and acceptable behavior to something that you can act on, that whoever is chairing your meeting, the mayor, can gavel down and say, this is what we're doing, and that's going to be clearly laid out in the bill in terms of the actions that you can take. I hope that's helpful. It's a bill we need you to support and endorse. I mean, we're getting already lots and lots of early support from, around the Bay Area, but also up and down the state. But we're happy to, obviously you can look up the bill, you can Google the bill, but we're happy to get you any further information you want. But I think both of us would very, very much appreciate City of Cupertino's support on the bill.
Well, I think our LRC will certainly take that up, and it's taken up a lot of good bills, a lot of bills that we didn't necessarily agree with, and I think both from yourself, Senator Cortese, and yourself, Assemblymember Lowe, we've had points of agreement and points of disagreement. But I just want to extend that thanks again. Thank you so much for coming out here this evening and having that kind of dialogue with us. I only see this yielding very positive dividends. We're at that time right now where we're going to transfer this over to our members of the public. And, I dare say we've provided a real treat, for the public. And, irrespective of where we are right now in this moment of time with the Brown Act, I'm just so grateful for the fact that we can all talk to each other in pandemic conditions in this sort of, context and have such an effective conversation as well. So hopefully that also is taken into consideration as we're looking at the contours of the Brown Act going forward. But let's go to our members of the public. And as usual, our members of the public, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. And please have your hand raised if you would like to speak on this item before the first member of the public is completed speaking. Right now, we have one hand raised on the Zoom function. That is from Jennifer Griffin, and we also have Lisa Warren now. And so, Jennifer, welcome, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor Darcy. Thank you to our wonderful staff and our legislative advocates. And thank you so much to our assembly member and our senator for coming out and visiting with us tonight. I think this is the first time that we've ever had either one of you, especially on a Zoom call. Thank you for taking so many measures to keep our county and our city safe during the pandemic. This was a very, very challenging 2 years for everyone. I appreciate you all being very, very cordial and talking about the issues that are going on in Sacramento. And I understand there are many, many issues going on. I just wanted to mention just a couple that affect me. And I will tell you right now that I'm very proud of my city council. My city has taken a very, very proactive approach to trying to make sure that residents of the city are comfortable and understand what is going on in Sacramento. I will tell you right now that SB 9 and SB 10 have made tremendous differences in my life. They have changed how I think about things operate in Sacramento. I'm very, very concerned about the loss of control, the nonstop onslaught of housing bills that we have been seeing for the last 4 years. We struggle to understand what Sacramento is trying to do. And I will again say very much, I'm very proud of my city and my city council members. 9 and 10, I think we need to try to work on. I think that the whole Sacramento scene has lost essentially connection with the cities, and I feel like the cities are being persecuted to some extent. So going on from that, I have some grave problems with the ADUs. I feel like no one has asked the public how these affect. I will tell you, these bills right now, the ADUs 9 and 10, affect my housing, my home, my relatives' homes across the state. And it is a problem. It is a big problem. It causes a lot of sleepless nights. And when you throw in the pandemic and the confusion from these laws, the chaos and confusion, they're affecting HOAs. This is what we are living through right now. I'm very, very grateful that you all are working on laws in terms of transportation, trying to help things in the county. I do think that people need to understand that Cupertino exists as a city. It needs to be respected as a city, and the people of Cupertino need to be respected for being well-meaning residents of their city and residents of their state.
Thank you, Jennifer.
But I do understand that being an assembly person and senator.
Our next speaker is Lisa Warren, and the other hands that are raised are from Jean Bedord, Neil Park Mcclintock, and Connie Cunningham. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. So I guess first and foremost, I just really want to thank all of you for doing this and hope that you will do it again. We've got our new lobbyist people here. Yay. Okay. Glad you were part of that as well. I sort of don't want to say anything beyond that, but I'm just going to reference two things. Senator Cortese gave an example of how the the governor, et cetera, or whoever is taking these indexes and not interpreting them correctly is basically what I got from your comment when you were comparing Southern California and our area. And I just want to take that further, that there's many people who have power or somehow are given power over all of us, including themselves as residents, who use indexes and other data that just is plain bad data. And then they refuse to recognize that when people calmly, logically point it out. And I think that's all over this political spectrum. And it's very sad. And it's very dangerous. So anyway, another thing, Jennifer mentioned she's trying, or we as her we is, are trying to figure out what Sacramento is doing. But I would add to that, many of us are trying to figure out why they're doing what they're doing. And I'll just leave it at that. But most importantly, thank you, all of you, and we'll see you around.
Thank you, Lisa. Our next speaker is Jean Bedord. Welcome, Jean.
Good evening, Mayor Paul, council members, Assembly Member Evan Lowe, and Senator Dave Cortese. My name is Jean Bedord, and I am a longtime Cupertino resident. I'm also an Apolli alum and commend Assembly Member Lowe for his cultivation of young civic leaders. I want to thank Mayor Paul and the council for organizing this workshop. An evening open meeting is much more effective in understanding the issues that will be coming up in Sacramento this year. The annual blizzard of bills is hard for the public to decipher, and a city legislative process is conducted on weekday mornings, which means the public is limited in participation. I would particularly like to thank Representative Lowe and Senator Cortese for their consistent championing of housing bills. While local control is lauded, it has failed our community. Here in Cupertino, there is lip service to adding badly needed housing. However, this is a city which produced a grand total of 20 new housing units in the year 2020. Of note, 19 of those 20 units were ADUs, incentivized by state, not local laws. So state housing laws are essential to moving ahead in housing production. Now on school funding, I do urge you to change the requirements to pass school revenue measures. Right now, tyranny of the minority rules. Our local CUSD Measure A received about a 60% vote, but it failed to meet the 2/3 majority to pass. Certainly, it's reasonable to require a majority vote, but shouldn't it be 55% majority rather than 2/3? Again, thanks to both of you for listening to and representing the various viewpoints of our community. And Assembly Member Lowe, I look forward to voting for you in November. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. We next have Neil Park Mcclintock. Welcome, Neil.
Hi, I wanted to address the Assembly Member and the Senator. Thank you so much for being here today and working with our city. My name is Neil. I'm the president of Cupertino for All, and we're pretty laser focused on housing and transportation issues and how that relates to creating an inclusive community. I'm going to provide a little bit of a contrary opinion here to what was heard earlier. I'm actually a fan of the majority of the state housing bills that have been passed, especially related to production, to act as if these bills serve no purpose or that our legislative representatives are making no effort in the Capitol, I think is just false when it comes to housing. And that our representatives have done a good job of supporting the bills that are moving us forward in terms of necessary housing production at all income levels. So I wanted to thank you both for the work that you're doing and the continued efforts that you're doing on housing, and that there's still so much more to do, as the City Council has pointed out as well in many ways. And we look forward to working together and appreciate your cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil. And next and finally, we have Connie Cunningham. Welcome, Connie.
Thank you, Mayor Paul. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you for hosting this meeting with Representative Lowe and Senator Cortese. I very much appreciate both of their efforts in the state legislature to propose and follow up and vote on housing production preservation bills. I, in fact, do support many of the bills that have been passed, including the SB 9, SB 10, the ADU bills. In 2017, I was quite pleased to see the ADU bill passed, and said so on a number of occasions at the Housing Commission meeting, which I am now a member of. I wasn't at the time. And I've also spoken to my legislative committee about my support of the ADUs. As far as the other bills being a problem, I think one of the things they're doing is helping people who have no current ability to live in our cities, including Cupertino, to become producing productive members of our society by becoming housed. I particularly am concerned with homelessness in our area, as well as homeless students, and am very happy to see the work that is being done at our legislative level. I do think they use democratic means. I think that is an unfair characterization that they use undemocratic means. I think, in fact, we all have voted for our representatives, and they are doing what their constituents are asking of them. I want to thank you, Senator Cortese. I want to thank you, Assemblyman Lowe, for your work, and look forward to hearing more about your efforts in the future. Thank you, Connie Cunningham, longtime resident of Cupertino and current Housing Commission member.
Thank you, Connie. And let's bring this back. And once again, Senator and Assembly Member, we are very, very pleased to have been able to host you here this evening. I have to give credit where credit's due. Our LRC, our Legislative Review Committee, has done so much work. And I think it's caught a lot of attention, from all sides of the spectrum. But I think ultimately we can say that its work laid the foundation for us to be really informed and able to invite you here today and have that full-fledged conversation about all these various topics. And of course, we could probably have a 6-part series over the course of the year and not even begin to scratch the surface of a lot of the issues that affect us. But we're just so very grateful. Let me go ahead and provide you the opportunity, if you have any closing remarks that you'd like to share with the community. And I guess this time I'll go in order of Senator Cortese, followed by Assemblymember Lowe. Just based upon everything that you heard and any words of advice, I think interaction is really important. We often hear lots of viewpoints. Senator Cortese, for instance, I'm deeply appreciative of your comments with regard to SB 9 and our rights, basically embedded within the legislation itself. But then, of course, it's not always characterized like that, as you noted. I mean, if you have any words of advice as to, how interactivity would be, kind of perhaps adjusted, that could help us in Cupertino. I think, yourself and the Assembly Member and I, we're all, actually politically, supporters of organized labor, for instance. And so, kind of looking at that but looking at it vis-a-vis a lot of these, various issues that we have, such as transportation, in that same kind of vein, how to kind of think about transitions without kind of stepping on toes, for instance, And it's sort of the same conversation, right? I mean, because a lot of times people see, interests that are there and they kind of feel like, okay, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to my interests? How do you have those conversations, given your lifelong career in the public arena and, elected representation? Perhaps that's something that you might like to speak to in closing. But and I'll also say before opening this up to both of you for the close, you're welcome back at any time. I mean, we're really, just open arms, happy to have you here. And, I think the trademark of Cupertino that I hope that everyone, eventually ends up seeing is that we just have great conversations when it comes down to it. So, Senator Cortese, without any further ado, I'd love to hand it back to you for any closing thoughts that you have.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor. And regardless of whatever else we agree or disagree upon, I'll hand you kudos for running a tight ship and concluding the meeting on time. I didn't think for a minute there we were going to get there at 8 o'clock, but you did it. And thanks for all the public comment and the public testimony that we heard within that time. It's great to hear folks on different sides of the issues. In short, I mean, I'm flattered that you would ask me a question about these sensitive issues and the kind of some seemingly thankless job that, it is to be in politics. And I know we're in a public meeting and I think, the things I said earlier about Cupertino taking a look at the bill and saying, here's what our rights are, and we're going to exercise our rights. I stand with that. And I think legislators like us need to say that. We need to say the truth, and we need to back you up. You shouldn't be out there on an island by yourself. But it is, I started to say, we don't get into this job for thanks. We certainly don't get into it for money. And we certainly really don't get into it for any recognition, any of us, including those public service individuals who are on this Zoom who weren't elected. The only reason to do this is to help people. And we got to have an abiding belief that at the end of each session, at the end of each week and each month, that we're helping people. And if we can get some self-fulfillment out of that vocational calling, then we perhaps lived a career worth doing. But let me just say, some young people at the Campbell Unified School District taught me a great lesson just a few days ago at the School of Innovation. They brought me into a room where they convene almost instantly when they recognize a problem. It could be a problem with their site. It could be a problem with the larger community. It could be a problem in an individual single classroom. It could be a problem between two students. And what they told me is we immediately convene, we come up with a solution that we can try. A solution that we can try. We put the idea of moving forward ahead of who's right and who's wrong. And if that idea turns out to be wrong and it doesn't work, we convene again immediately and we course correct and we try something again. We keep trying. We keep trying to have productive conversations and put action into motion until we get it right. And I just think that's all you can do. And I respect the Cupertino City Council for going about your business, representing your constituents to the best of your judgment, and interpreting the law on its face, legally and politically as fairly as you can. Just go about your business. They say the world is a stage, but sometimes we have to forget about the stage, I think, and just go about our business and get things done, just like those kids over there at Innovation School. So thank you for a few minutes. I hope I didn't sound like I was preaching, because I think I know most of you and I know you're in it for the public good. And thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you, Senator Cortese. And Assemblymember Lowe, well, thank you for being here this evening as well. I know that we have just a plethora of topics that we can end with. I think one of our public speakers alluded to the fact that, of course, as an Assembly member, You're up on the cycle every 2 years, and you've been hit with redistricting as well. And so, this is something that frankly, you and I have talked about, quite recently. But with regard to the context of the legislative issues in front of us, is there anything that you'd like to share in terms of mindset and philosophy going forward? Any branching off of what Senator Cortese was saying with regard to the insights for trying to work at a thing, keep on working at it, try again, that kind of notion, or anything, frankly, with regard to what's affecting us here in Cupertino. And again, very happy to have you here, and hope to have you back in the near future as well.
Thank you very much, Mayor Paul. Again, thank you very much to the City Council, and for members of the public watching. You have a very dedicated City Council and public servants who put in the time, energy, and effort. I've seen the graphs, I've seen the reports, and I said, oh my goodness, see if Cupertino gets more bang for their buck from these council members, especially how much they get paid by the city. All joking aside, though, I do value as much public engagement as possible. That's why our district office is in Cupertino. I've had the pleasure of serving and working for the city of Cupertino and the residents of Cupertino my entire tenure in the legislature. And of course, we are so fortunate to have a steady hand, a sage in public service with Senator Cortese. You should also know that it is not a secret that not all legislators get along with their respective counterparts in the Assembly and the Senate. But because Senator Cortese and I see eye to eye on so many different things and have a guiding principle of philosophy for delivering for our community, this makes it much easier for us to partner and help shepherd things through. So I want to make sure that our community doesn't take that for granted as well, and acknowledge his service. Finally, let me just say that our staff will be readily available. We're just right down the street. So I know a number of you have been in my ear at Panera Bread when I'm getting my coffee, or over at CVS as well too. So at any point in time, we are here for you, and our staffs are here for you. I come from the city of Cupertino through De Anza Community College and have deep ties, and we'll continue this effort too. But this is also a reminder about how exciting City Council is. And just recall that I felt like I was back in the City Council back in Campbell. I haven't had spent this much time, a long period of time, but it just reminded me when I was fighting the state legislature when they eliminated the redevelopment agency. So again, I just share that with you because I do value your input. And if there are opportunities that we can look for partnerships and actually deliver, we're here for you. So thanks again for this opportunity.
Great. Thank you so much, Assembly Member. And thank you so much, Senator. Well, at this time, as promised, we're a little bit behind, but thank you so much again for being with us this evening. We'll check back in certainly near the end of summer to see if there's any appetite to come back and say hi to us folks in Cupertino near the end of the legislative session, and kind of think forward prospectively as well. But at this time, let us bid our elected representatives to the state a great evening, and thank them for being here tonight. If you care to stay, of course, you're more than welcome to. But I also wanted to keep a commitment to my city council that if people wanted to have some further discussions, happy to do that. I personally am happy to go back to my family at home. But if anybody, among our city council would like to have some follow-up comments, I'll just go by a show of hands at this time in terms of, if there's any care for further discussion. See you, Senator. And I do see Vice Mayor Chow's hand raised, and take care, Assembly Member Lowe. Have a great night as well. And so I do want to point out, we do have a couple of representatives from their respective offices, both of whom are actually Cupertino residents. Tarshri Krishnan from the Office of the Senator, as well as, I believe in the attendees, we had Patrick Aarons at one point during the evening. So I just wanted to give them their acknowledgement and thank them for everything that they do for our community as well. So Vice Mayor Chow, let's go ahead and start with you. And my personal request is, we can go on and on and on, of course, but if we can kind of keep our thoughts encapsulated, I think that would be, much appreciated in terms of kind of wrapping up our discussion here this evening. Vice Mayor Chow.
Yeah, I really appreciate Senator Cortese, who has left, that mentioned that what we are doing for the best interest of the Cupertino to adopt SB9 ordinance is the intent of the legislature to allow some local control on this bill. So, and what we are doing our best to serve our residents, which is our responsibility and is what we should do. And I also appreciate when he said that he learned from the innovation high that all these bills, we are supposed to propose a bill and evaluate if it doesn't work, and then we adjust. And I was hoping to ask a question about, okay, we have had so many housing bills so far, but the housing price hasn't come down. So when and how will the legislators reevaluate their housing bills so that we can have an assessment whether it's working? If it's not working, why? Because a lot of these are market speculation. So all those bills are not working. We need to know why, and so we can adjust. So I really appreciate that he has that mindset, that if SB 35 is proposed, something doesn't work, that's fine to adjust. If SB 9 or any other bill, SB 330 is proposed, it doesn't really lower the housing prices. Let's find out how that works. Maybe our consultants, lobbyists could provide some insight on how legislators reevaluate their bills. Or we can talk about this when we do the ARRC meeting.
Yeah, let's do that. Vice Mayor Chow, I think that you bring up a great point, and this is an ongoing issue in all of public work, right? How do you apply ongoing metrics? But look, maybe Joe or Jason Gonzalez, or Paul rather, Gonzalez, would you like to speak to the idea of how metrics could be applied to the efficacy of some of this legislation and thereby help inform, perhaps some possible changes or future legislation responses, by our localities and particularly us in Cupertino. Certainly with the SB 35 project, you had a fairly significant project there, largest SB 35 project in the entire state. And, part of the follow-up, frankly, was, driven by the same forces and engines that drove the legislation in the first place, right? I mean, you do have those monetary considerations. Capital is out there, and there is a marriage, right, of these various types of influences and concerns across the board. Nothing's perfect, nothing's set in stone. We're work in progress, of course, but yeah, just briefly on the metrics. Are there any high-level points of advice before we bring it over to other council members? And I'll go ahead and wrap that up and let the Gonzalez firm speak to this particular issue before we do that.
Mayor Paul and members of the council, I want to first congratulate you. I think it was a very good workshop. It was invaluable for the community and a job well done, and a job particularly well done by Katie and the management team doing the groundwork for this. We're less than a week into our representation, but to the question, I think that is exactly the feedback with the vice mayor's comments and noting that housing prices and affordability has not come down despite legislative efforts. So I think to that question, the feedback to your legislators is important. There's the speaker's staff, Katie Cunningham and others that handle local government issues that we work very closely with. There's also Pathways Senate Office of Research can do studies on bills. It's a little known part of the process, but they do deep dives into outcomes. As well as there's the state auditor that can also be a follow-up tool. So the short answer, Mayor, is the feedback is invaluable to your legislators. And then there are parts of the process that we can utilize to do deeper dives and look at outcomes either within a region or throughout the state.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So, I'll go ahead and wrap this for the evening. We did have this agendized as a discussion with our state legislators, and I want to make sure that we honor the spirit as well as the the formal letter of that requirement. So, but I did, want to make sure that we provide an opportunity for the Gonzalez's to, provide some thoughts and a preview as to, some of the work that we have coming up in this upcoming session. So thank you very much, everyone. My colleagues on the council, our city staff, our members of the public for being here with us this evening. We will go ahead and adjourn, and I'll let you know that our next regularly scheduled meeting is going to be March 1st, which is, I'm sorry, is that right? Yeah, March 1st, which is next Tuesday. And so we will see you there, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.